What's going on, you guys? This is Joey Central, and welcome back to my C++ programming tutorial series. Today, we are going to be discussing variables. Now, before I start discussing the different types of variables and how to apply them in programming code, I'm going to kind of explain to you first what exactly a variable is conceptually. So, as you can see from this little diagram here, this big, huge blob that pretty much houses everything, this is the memory. Inside the memory, we have two different concepts. Now keep in mind, there is more to it than this. But for now, we're only going to focus primarily on one thing, though I will mention something else as well. Inside the smaller circle over here, to the left, we have the stack. And basically what this stack is where everything in our program so far will take place in. We're not going to focus on the heap for now. We're not going to get into the heap until much later. But we will get into the heap once we start talking about dynamic memory. So, inside of our stack, as I mentioned before, we have these things called stack frames, which are essentially functions. And every single time you have a function that's being executed, a new stack or stack frame is added on the very top. Because when you run a program, it's basically running sequentially. All the basically new stack frames are pretty much stacked right on top of the older one. So for an example, if you have another function running with the main function. If the main function runs first, then the only stack that will be in the stack frame is the main function. But once another function executes, then the program will then stack that stack frame on top of the main. And then once that function is done executing, either it returns a value, if it's not a void, or if it is a void and it's done executing, then it's simply going to remove the top of the stack, which is the function that was running, and then I'll go back to running the main stack frame. And then once you exit the main stack frame, that's pretty much when the program ends. So I know this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. I'm gonna actually draw out the main stack frame, and then I'm gonna draw out a variable as well, so we can actually begin understanding what a variable is. So, as you can see, we have drawn out our main stack frame. The little rectangle inside of our stack is the main function. Now, let's say we want to create a variable, and variables play a huge part in programming. So unless you don't want to learn programming, then you have to get acquainted with variables. So what is a variable exactly? A variable is just simply a type of object that is inside the stack. Particularly in this case, it is inside the main stack frame. Now, what attribute should we be concerned with when we talk about stack frames? Or, not stack frames, variables. A variable usually has an address called a memory address. Usually there's a hexadecimal code here, say 0x0001 C30. Okay. Usually there's 6 digits inside. It's pretty much, this is hexadecimal. If you don't know what hexadecimal is, it's okay. This is mainly for conceptual purposes, and it may not be this exact value. Truth of the matter is, nobody really knows what it's going to be, because basically the memory address is basically system dependent. So depending on what system you're using, your memory address is going to be different, and it'll always be different every time you compile it. Because in computers, there's going to be a lot of different factors and variables going on underneath the hood. So anyways, what else is there to associate a variable with? Well, we have a name, obviously, or an alias. So in this case, we're going to just call it var. So we got a variable named var, and it is inside of our main stack frame, and it has a memory address of 0x0001. So this is kind of relevant to our later discussions when we start talking about pointers. But basically, this is what a variable is. Now, a variable can take on many different values. It could take on an integer, it can take on a double, it can take on something in between a double and like a float, for an example, which is kind of like a double, but basically it's a little smaller. And then, of course, you can also use chars as well. So that's kind of essentially what a variable is in a nutshell. Now that I kind of discussed what a variable is, we're going to actually start up on going over the different types of variables that exist in C++. Now that I explained what a variable is from a conceptual point of view, I'm going to show you guys what a variable is from the coding perspective. To do that, it is time to create a new project. Either go to New or File New and then New Project, or you can just press Control-Shift-N if you are using Windows. And then once again, we're going to use a Windows console application, and we're going to name this variable test. Okay, now that it's in the right directory, click OK. So now, if you remember from our Hello World program, we have to add in some headers because we do want to display some text. And honestly, at first, I'm just going to add them all in, but I don't want you guys to think that you have to do it in every single situation. I do want to include the IO stream because I want us to see text. And it might not be in this video, but it will be one more covering variables. So I want you guys to do the same thing we did in the Hello World program. We're going to use pound and type include. And then we're going to use the arrow brackets. And we're going to type in IO stream. And after that, we're going to be type at the very top, a couple lines. Doesn't have to be the couple of lines, but it does make the program look nicer if you using a line that isn't connected with the include statements. So I would just hit enter twice after you're done typing include IOStream, and then go type using namespace standard. And then make sure you include the semicolon at the very end. Okay, so we have our main function right over here. We're going to start off by creating a couple of variables. Now, as I create these variables, I'm going to explain to you what it is, and then I'm also going to write in the comments an example of them or what they look like. Now, I'm going to be talking more about comments in the next video after I'm done talking about variables. Comments aren't exactly the utmost important. However, comments are kind of important when you're working with larger projects, and they become crucial when you're working in collaboration projects. The reason why is because only you know what you're coding. And even if you're not working with anybody else, I can't tell you the number of times that I've kind of saved my own ass by using comments when I stop working on a project for a couple months and I come right back to it. Because I see all of these functions that I've created, these helper functions, and I'm like, what the hell is this? What the hell is this? What am I doing? So there's a number of times where, without the comments, I would have probably have wasted even more time. So they become crucial when you start developing larger and larger projects. So I want to kind of teach it to you in the very beginning. Okay, so in our very first line, we're going to start off with an integer. So this is just a comment. You don't have to type this in your program if you don't want to. As I've explained, we will be discussing comments in the next video. An integer is pretty much a number that is whole. For an example, 1, 2, 3, or let's do this. -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, etc. So that's what an integer is. So an integer can pretty much take on any value that's positive or negative, as long as it's a real number and basically it doesn't have a decimal. Now you'll find out soon when we go into more details on integers that if you try to pass any kind of value that has a decimal like 2.5, it'll truncate down to pretty much just being a 2. So it doesn't round. Like if it was rounding, obviously a 2.5 would be 3, but that's not what's happening here. It doesn't matter if it's 2.999. For an example, if we wanted to create an integer with the value of 2, we would type in int integer, or that wouldn't be a good programming practice. Let me see. Let's say int foo equals 2. Oops, 2. So that would be, in general, how you'd create an integer. Now, in other programming languages, you don't have to assign a value immediately. You could just say int foo, and that's it. And then later on, do anything you want. And then down here, you just do you say, okay, well, let's have foo equal 2. However, in C++ programming, that is not good practice. And the reason why is because when you create that variable foo and it has no value, the problem is the compiler doesn't even know what foo is. It's not going to be 0. And if you try to confirm that by just using cout, it may show 0, but it's undefined. It could take on any value. It could foo could be 0. It could be 99999, or it could take on some random memory address. Nobody knows. So that's why in C++, when you make any variable, not just an integer, but any variable, you want to have it be assigned to something. Now there is an exception to one type, and we'll get to that when I get there. The second type of variable is double. Unlike integers, a double can take on irrational numbers or rational numbers, meaning basically numbers that have decimal places in them. So basically, number that is, let's say a real number So what do I mean by rational? So in case you guys don't know the difference between rational and irrational, basically a rational number is pretty much a number that can be given by dividing any kind of number by some other number. So for an example, 2.5 is a rational number because 5 divided by 2 gives you 2.5. And the same thing with 3.5, because 7 divided by 2 is basically 3.5. And then of course it also covers irrational numbers as well. For an example, the square root of 2, which is 1.4 something. Don't remember the other digits, but it's irrational because there are no numbers. There are no quotients that gives you the square root of 2 or the value of square root of 2, and basically the digits go on forever. So if you want to create a double, then like a double variable, you'd say double foo, and let's say we want. Actually, let's do pi, and that's 3.14. Okay, so there's other types of variables as well for numbers. There's float, there's long, there's int long, but I'm not gonna go into them. And basically, if you want to know more about them, simply just go on cplus.com and then just type in variables, and you'll see a whole list of variables, because there's a whole lot that even I don't remember. So, like I said, that's when you refer to your resources, and any good programmer worth their salt would know how to do that. Lastly, I'm going to go into Chars. So a character is basically just a single letter. The lowercase letter, uppercase, it can even be other symbols as well. Okay, so that's a very, very simple explanation, and that isn't enough to know what a character is. And I feel like the only way to really show you what a char is if we actually create a variable. Now, I'm gonna go more into details on char, not just in the in variables, but also when I start talking about something called C strings, and that's when you guys are gonna finally understand what chars are really capable of. And it's also going to be when you discover something called strings. And we're going to be talking about strings a lot through this series. But I kind of want to give you an understanding of kind of what a string is first. And I feel like the best way to do that is to introduce chars. So, focusing on the matter of hand, we type in char, and let's say call foo, because why not? And basically, if you declare a char, then you pretty much use single, not double, quotations. And if we want the letter A, now keep in mind, when C++ compare, let's say we have two chars, 1 and 2, it's foo boo equals capital A. Now, let me ask you guys this. Is foo equal to boo? They're both the letter A, right? One's lowercase, one's uppercase. Are they both the same characters? The answer is no. They are not. Because if you look at the ASCII code of both of these characters, they're different. The ASCII code for lowercase a is not the same as the ASCII code for capital A. So you have to be careful when distinguishing chars. Now, I'm going to be talking more about chars later, so don't worry if if nothing makes sense to you just yet. I just want to show you guys basic primitive variable types. So anyways, this is a very basic explanation of variables, and I kind of want to show you guys some applications of variables so you have a better understanding. And I'm gonna make the next video be about integer and double, because honestly I don't think it's really worth the effort and time to make another variable based off of doubles. So I'm going to combine integer and doubles in the next video. Anyways, if you found this video helpful, then do click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will be uploading the next video shortly.